Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
Yes, it's me, Egbert. As the new owner of this station, I want to make sure we have the best talent on the air. That's why I've decided to ban all real estate agents and only have real talkers like Brad and John. Here they are, B and J.
And it is the BJShow.co. John, I think I got it right for the first time coming out of a break.
You did. I'm
Unbelievable.
smiling to myself because I'm like, you know what? We've nailed it. In the Willie McGee number 51 episode, we have nailed it.
Okay, a couple things to talk about. First off, right off the get-go, the presidential primary was this past Saturday in South Carolina, correct?
Correct,
and
yeah.
The reason that they wanted to move, the Democrats didn't want to move the order around, was they wanted to make the South Carolina, the first one was because the soothsayers that looked at the 2020 campaign said that the reason that Biden essentially became the preeminent nominee for the Democratic primary, and if you remember, he did not do well in Iowa. There was all that commotion in Iowa. I think they screwed up the primary for the Democrats in Iowa, and then he didn't do well in New Hampshire, but yet he killed it in South Carolina. I read the story last night, and tell me if you've heard differently of this. He did great. The only problem was only 4% of the people voted.
Yeah, but I mean, think of it as we get past, and let's apply that to Republicans, as we get past March 2nd. I mean, there's no enthusiasm, and I hate to say this as a guy that's going to vote for Trump, but there's not, other than people that are hardcore Trump and Biden people, there's not a whole lot of enthusiasm. It's not like you have a bunch of DeSantis people, like many people had hoped, going to every Republican caucus and raising a ruckus.
But and talk about DeSantis, man, did he disappear in a hurry or what? He's like,
I mean, remember, Brad, these guys are human, and he also has a state to run.
Well, someone has compared him to Punxsutawney Phil. Well,
you know what that means? We might have 4 more years of Donald Trump.
Right. Who knows? Anyway, crazy stuff. Okay, you and I, this is sort of interesting from me, from this respect that I say that instead of us radio people dissing on each other, we should promote each other. And the reason I say that is there are lots of people on the internet who are influencers who essentially do collabs. Now, back in the day, when I first got in the radio business, it was mainly groups, rock groups, soul groups, whatever you want to call it. You had the bands, and you had like the Four Tops and the Temptations and Martha Reeves and the Vandellas and Diana Ross and the Supremes. The music business has pretty much gotten away from bands of all type, and if you go through the top 40, it's almost all single artists, no bands, just single artists. But very frequently you have collabs where you have, what would be a good one?
I have one coming up. Taylor Swift and Florence and the Machines.
Is that something new? Or did they?
Yeah. I learned about that last night. Yeah, she's going to be, Florence and the Machines is going to be on a Taylor Swift song called, don't remember the name.
Is that her new album that's coming out? Is that what the deal is?
It's coming out called I think the Tortured Poet Society, or I may be making that up. It's Tortured Poet something.
Right. Okay.
The Swifties are going to kill me for not knowing, but go ahead, Brad.
So the idea being is that instead of, because those of us in the radio business have a problem. We have an issue, an image problem, in that people think that radio's dead, nobody listens anymore. But still, to this day, Nielsen still rates radio as the largest mass media there is out there. 90+%, depending upon which survey you see. Sometimes it's 92, sometimes 93. 92 or 93% of the adult population listens to radio at least once a week. That's the metric they use. How often do you go on social media? Once a week. And, or how often do you watch broadcast TV? How often do you watch what they call OTT, which essentially is connected TV, stuff like that. Radio still is number one. But yet we have this thing where there's a bunch of us small stations, and we're all small stations. We're not the big boys. We're not like the iHearts or the Cumulus,
or
where the Cumulus
like that,
are in this market
Hubbard
would be
Media.
Odysseys, the Hubbards, which is like WIL and Arch and things like that. We're the small guys. And that would include us. That would include Tracy's station. Although she's, well, we're a 50,000 watt station now. Yeah, but the only problem is the transmitter's in Warrenton. So by the time you get to downtown St. Louis, there's not much of a signal left, and there's hardly any signal in the east side. So it's not what we call a full market coverage signal like the Y98s and the KSHEs and things like that. Instead of beating each other over the head, we should be helping each other. But that's not the way it's turned out. So John tells me yesterday that you have been banned on their Instagram account, or what's the deal?
To be clear, so to be fair, Instagram has a feature that's essentially, I call it a soft block. I don't know if that's what it's called, but you can keep someone from viewing your profile. And this is helpful if somebody's dealt with stalkers or harassers or things like that. I went looking yesterday for 93.3 for Real Talk because I like to tag. If we mention somebody on the show, and I do, our show's Instagram post about it, I like to tag them. It's a way of respect. It's a way, if we talk about Brian Nieves or we talk about Mark Reardon or anybody, I like to tag them just as a sign of respect. I couldn't find 93.3 when I did a search for the accounts. Now I can view their page if I go somewhere where I'm not locked in or I'm not logged in. So in other words, if I go to a browser, I can see, 93.3's posts. But so essentially, somebody from the station made the decision that it was a good idea to block. Now, when I post to Instagram, I post from our show account and also I have a personal account. I have a johncombest.com account. So now the other thing that we should mention here too, Brad, is that if you're somebody that's working at 93.3 and you don't know Brad and you don't know John, you might just think, well, who are these idiots talking about us? We don't like people talking about us. Let's block them. Let's make sure they can't see our stuff, or let's send them a message. We don't know that it's Tracy Ellis. We don't know, we don't know who it is. And there are certainly good people and we love Brian Nieves. There are certainly people working at that radio station that we've never met that do a good job, But I just thought it was interesting that for what we've done to even to speak about 93.3, that they would think it was necessary to, maybe they feel like we're harassing them. I don't know.
Well, Tracy, I go way back with Tracy, like 15, 16 years, something like that. And I don't quite, the interesting part of it was I was still talking with her and Rick when they were getting the station on the air and trying to help them. And I was told at one meeting they didn't trust me because I'm a radio guy. I'm going like, okay, aren't you trying to get in the radio business? I mean, I don't quite understand that thing. That would be like you saying, I'm going to open a restaurant, but I'm not going to listen to any other restaurant guys because all the restaurant guys are terrible people. Like, okay, so
I get it.
Doesn't that make you a terrible person by being in the restaurant business? So I just don't understand it. And once again, it's a different form of philosophy. I mean, it's interesting because to me, you look at platforms like YouTube, which, I will say this all day long. I'm a radio guy, but yet I do tons of video kind of stuff. And I've watched lots of video kind of stuff. And I watch a lot of these influencers and things like that. And one of the things they always talk about is exactly what you just said, get everybody to promote you. In other words, get people to, because, if you get it, like, for example, if you have a product that, let's say in women's makeup, and you get one of these ladies who does the makeup, there's a ton of the makeup videos where they show you how to put your eyeliner on and stuff like that. And if you get one of these women who is a very well-established influencer, and she starts using your product, you've hit the mother load. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
because people are going to go, because to a certain extent, most of these people are not being compensated. Now, sometimes the above people would say, hey, I'm going to talk about this, and to be perfectly honest, they sent me the product for an evaluation.
Yeah, for sure.
And they didn't pay me any money. They just, matter of fact, if you go onto you go onto Amazon, there's a bunch of them on there because they send out products for, evaluation products.
Yeah, and Amazon has an influencer program whereby they, and people disclose it, and the YouTubers disclose it, and.
Right. So the interesting part of this is that if you look at what happened, and this all happened, I guess, three plus years ago, when the new ownership of 97.1 essentially made some changes to the station and tried to make a little bit more, not right, hard right, but tried to bring it more into the center. And people like Tracy just took that as like the ultimate insult because she called those rhinos. Now, I'll give her credit because the fact that, if somebody does you wrong and you don't think they're doing a good job, what do? Jump on in, the water's fine, compete with them, which is essentially what she's doing. But I just don't understand the crazy stuff. Like you talked about, the guy on the air right now, the morning guy is Dan Strauss. I've known Dan, I don't know, for probably 35 years. Dan's one of the nicest, easygoing guys, but by the same token, he's a radio pro. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah,
he's a sharp guy.
And so I think it goes also to a matter of personal security and self-confidence and how you feel about yourself. And Brad, we talked in the commercial break. So, for example, a guy in Kansas City, Tony Bateo, has a really kind piece up that he posted either last night or this morning or yesterday. And I linked to it on my website today. And, Tony gives us a shout out. He is very complimentary of our show. He suggests people go to our show and listen to it. We gave him a shout out the other day because he wrote a terrific piece about fentanyl. And at no point, and I've known Tony since 2005, at no point has Tony ever looked at johncombest.com and said, boy, we can't have people go into John's political news aggregation site or else it will take people away from me. To hell with that guy. Tony would never look at the situation like that, because what I do on my website or when I write for the Missouri Times or when I do this show with you, Brad, it's not detracting from what Tony in Kansas City is doing with his audience. And if anything, we send people to him. And on days like today, Tony sends people to my website. Tony sends people to our show. But that speaks to the personal security of a guy like a Tony who's not threatened. And you know what? I bet you if another blogger started up in Kansas City and produced really quality content, Tony would be there cheering him on.
Well, once again, it comes down to it. I mentioned the Bob Gibson story, that Bob Gibson was this incredibly talented and tenacious pitcher for the Cardinals. And the story was that he just took that competitive nature to the nth degree, and to the point where there were teammates that told the story that, like, let's say the teams were, like, let's say the Cubs were in town, and I just throw on a team, could be any team, and Bob Gibson went to a restaurant and he saw that there were some Cubs players in the restaurant. He would get up and leave and go to another restaurant because they were the enemy. The guy who used to run Camo X, Bob Hyland, he told his staff there are no competitors, just the enemy. And to the point, that's the way he ran it. Now, I've never been that way. I can't do that. I can't put that, I can't wake up in the morning and think to myself, man, I hate those guys over at WIL. They're the worst.
And also, to me, it seems a lot like an elementary school thing where you're like, okay, it's the other team, and the way to rile yourself up is to say, okay, that's the enemy. And if you got to rely on that kind of a gimmick to get yourself riled up, instead of like, hey, every day let's do the absolute best show we can. And the best part about the story, Brad, is that later on today, you and I are going to be driving in our cars, and I'm going to put on the Brian Nieves show. And the fact that Tracy appears to not like you very much doesn't keep me from wanting to listen to what Brian has to say.
Well, I just don't get it, but that's just me. I don't get a lot of things. There are things when I think to myself, I've been accused of being wound too tight, and I will agree with a lot of that stuff because I feel that you have to have a passion for what you do. If you go to a restaurant, and my thing was, I can remember a restaurant I used to go to all the time, Willikers, which I loved in St. Charles, right there on Highway 94, which since they've closed has been a bunch of other things. Yeah. And the guy who was the owner was out there in the restaurant talking to people. Hey, how's your food? Everything good. And to the point where it always impressed me because the guy who runs the place is there. He's there making sure that, now there are some people that go like, well, that's the exact opposite of what he should be doing. He shouldn't be doing that. He should have a manager that does that, and he should be out buying more restaurants. Okay, I get it. I understand that there's a different mentality, that it's like the Ray Kroc mentality is that, he wants to conquer the world with fast food, and if you've ever watched the movie The Founders, it actually paints Ray Kroc in a very, very, very negative light. I mean, like, for example, one of Ray's, there's some interesting quotes from Ray Kroc, and one of them was he was asked about his competition. And I think this was like a college or something like that. He was doing a presentation of like a business school or something like that. And someone asked the question, if you went by a lake and one of your competitors were drowning, would you try to save them and pull them out of the lake? And his response was, no, I'd find a fire hose and stick it in their mouth and turn the hose on. Yeah, I mean, like, whoa. Like, in other words, he's essentially saying if his competitor was in need of life-saving, literally life-saving, he would kill the competitor. And I'm going like, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, that kind of stuff is like, you have to sort of step back and say, okay, big picture, we're all human beings, and ultimately, what are we here for? Well, the jury's out on that, but the whole deal is, if we essentially just beat up on each other and we just want to kill each other, it turns into St. Louis City, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also a good thing as a reminder, too. And I talk a little bit about this in my book, which folks can find on Amazon. If you look for stalking and harassment on Amazon, you'll find this. I mean, quite simply, and this is something that you might teach your kids as well, for folks that are listening. They probably already do. Just because somebody treats you in a certain way doesn't mean you have to respond in kind.
Well,
and that doesn't mean – and we'll use our friend Brian Nieves as an example. Just because Tracy would not like you or might not be so kind to you, it doesn't mean that we're going to turn around and be jerks to a guy like Brian Nieves who we have a relationship with,
Right, and he's a good guy,
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's funny, him and I haven't talked for months, and all of a sudden Friday he sends me a text, and I talk Friday night, and him and I have talked a couple times since then this week, and the sad part of it is Brian's gone through some personal issues that I didn't know about, and he said to me, because he said, I'm not going to bring it up, but he just essentially said, blah, blah, blah. I go, I didn't know that. And he and he's moved in the whole bit. And and once again, I mean, as a person, I mean, is he a competitor? Yeah, because in afternoons he's going after the same audience that we have with Markley, Van Camp, and Robbins. That same type of conservative, I mean, and if you listen to the shows, very similar kind of show in the fact it's not all super serious talk show stuff. It's sort of light, and they talk about this, and they talk about, all sorts of crazy stuff. They talk about where they had lunch at today and how the waiter dropped a pork chop on their lap. I mean, stuff like that. I mean, and it's not super, oh, we got to be really serious about this. But, once again, what do I know? And the answer to that is not much. But I do know it's time for us to take a break. And if I don't take a break, I'm going to get in trouble here in a minute. This is the BJ Show. You can check it out. Check us out at bjshow.com.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?